Hunter S. Thompson, Generation of Swine. Just another terrorist attack. Or just another terrorist. My adversaries applied the one means that wins the easiest victory over reason. Terror and force. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf, Volume 1, Chapter 2. There was action all over the globe this week. Ed Meese went to Holland. Volcanoes menaced Alaska, and almost everywhere else in the world except Hawaii. American tourists were being chased down and shot like wild animals by international terrorists. President Reagan, meanwhile, flew to Hawaii to rest up for his visit to Bali and also to chat with his old friend Ferdinand Marcos from the Philippines. The man from Manila was still hunkered down in his cut-rate beach house near Diamond Head, cursing the kinks in his revenue stream and blowing most of his pocket money on new pairs of shoes for his wife. The woman is insatiable. She must have new shoes. Even now, after leaving 3,000 pairs in Manila, she needs a delivery every day. It is a Jones worse than China White. She will take black spikes of Capazios or even foam rubber flip-flops, just as long as they are the right size and new. The whole world laughed, but Marcos was not amused. He was, after all, the president, and his wife had a shoe fetish. So what? Shoes are cheap, and those who complained were probably communists anyway. They would be turned into pillars of salt when the sun came up in the morning, and in the meantime, he would stomp them and burn all their ballots. It was clearly the right thing to do, or at least it seemed that way at the time. But in fact, it was just another dumb, bare-knuckle type of terrorism that looked on TV about as bad as anything normally blamed on Gaddafi or Arafat or Abdu Nidal in Syria. Innocent people were beaten and shot at the polling places. Whole towns were terrorized by thugs in the pay of the president, who wrote his checks on the national treasury. It was arrogance on a level that shocked even his own generals. The discovery of 3,000 pairs of shoes in Imelda's closet was viewed with an almost universal repugnance in the English-speaking world. Not even Ted Koppel could tolerate it. When he interviewed Marcus on Nightline, he saved the shoe question for last. But Ferdinand just shrugged and dismissed the whole thing as a red herring. "Why all this talk about shoes?" he muttered. "We all wear shoes." And he was right, in a way. What is the cost of new shoes? Maybe 100 apiece? Or even 500? So what? We are talking here about a man who ran the whole Philippine Islands for 26 years, like it was some kind of personal dog kennel. He used silk handkerchiefs, like Kleenex, and routinely stole 10,000 full-grown mahogany trees with a single telephone call. Manila was no place for amateurs in those days. Not even Bob Arum could handle it. At one point, a few years ago, he talked to Imelda and thought he had a lock on the national dog racing concession. But when he finally went down to the palace and she stiffed him and demanded more front money than even Don King would call reasonable. Arum left in a funk and never went back. The dog racing license had pieced off to a combine from Singapore, which prospered briefly and went up in smoke when Marcos bit the bullet. Many investments went sour that day. Even smart people panicked and went out to find palm readers on Pillar Street. Men stared at each other in the aisles of the Metal Exchange in Hong Kong, and the Landlords Club in Luzon closed its doors because all the help disappeared. Bob Arum smiled and had a Methuselah of Dom Perignon sent up to his office on Park Avenue. These things happen. One day you run everything, and the next day you run like a dog. When they took Ferdinand out of his palace, he thought he was just going on a short flight up the coast to his home of province of Ilocos Norte. But when he woke up, he was in Guam, being shuffled around like a prisoner by a convoy of U.S. Secret Service agents. And after that, he was taken to Honolulu, where all his luggage was officially seized and impounded. There were trunks full of jewels and stacks of Swiss bonds, and 2 crates filled with $26 million of freshly printed Philippine pesos, so new that the ink was still wet. It was all seized, along with 2 crates of pesos belonging to General Fabian Ver, his traveling companion and former chief of the army, who was no longer mentioned in news stories out of Hawaii. General Ver is gone, along with $20 billion that Marcos was originally accused of stealing and embezzling for his own gain. Nobody knows where it went. The records are missing, and the bank books are not reliable. Only Imelda knows for sure, but every time she gets on the telephone she hears a click that tells her the Secret Service is listening. Why not? They are paying the phone bill, and the game is for very high stakes. $20 billion and half of the Philippines' gross national product for 1984. It is enough money to buy half of Kowloon, or a whole new air force of Soviet-built MiG-23 floggers for Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, who currently has only 584 combat planes, according to Soldiers of Fortune official spring listing for 1986. If the Colonel had that many more hot rod jet fighters, we would all be in serious trouble. And if Ferdinand Marcos could get his hands on that $20 billion he allegedly skimmed out of Manila while he was president, he can buy a nice ranch in Tripoli and live once again like a king. Libya is a big country. There is plenty of room for rich exiles who can't go home again. There are millions of acres out there in the desert, where swine like Marcos and Dulvier can live on huge estates with gold walls and be at peace with their neighbors. They will grow old and fat like gibbed cats, with plump little fingers and soft hair on the back of their necks, and they will not be inclined to adventures in international terrorism. April 28th, 1986.